Andrea Morganstern, thank you so much for talking to me about your practice.
Yeah.
You're in New York,
Mhm.
um, so that's where your studio is. You're in your studio at the moment. Do you want to tell me about your practice? Because I think I mean, you describe your paintings, and you are largely a painter, aren't you? Um, as abstract, and also I think there's a bit of figuration in there as well, would you say? Like how would you tell me about your work? Tell me what it's all about.
Okay, well, what I do is I take elements of the human body, animals, and plants, and I weave them together to create abstract biomorphic forms, and I build them out of dots, using dots as building blocks.
Okay.
So it's
Right.
suggestive of all these things, but not a literal depiction of them.
Okay. And so they're sort of biomorphic forms that are abstract, but they're also suggestive of forms that you would recognize in nature. How did you start with the dots? Like where did that come from? Like,
It came from a distinct moment when I was drinking my afternoon green tea, and I gazed down at the bottom of the cup, and in the tea grounds that had settled at the bottom, I saw universes of possibilities for new paintings. In the tea grounds, it almost became like a portal to another world, or like a divination tool that
wow.
triggered all kinds of ideas, and a source of endless inspiration to me. And so by using these dots like the tea grounds, I find that I can depict things in a way that things really exist in nature versus the way that things appear to our eyes. And so, for example, I came across an idea in string theory that I found very intriguing, that beyond the level of molecules, atoms, and subatomic particles, everything in the physical world is composed of what they call vibrating filaments of energy. In other words, nothing
Right.
is solid or permanent, and ultimately nothing's even physical at all. And I find it really intriguing that Indian philosophy also has this idea that the world is an illusion, in the sense that the way we perceive it is an illusion, that even though things look physically solid and permanent, everything's really in a state of flux, and in a continuous cycle of creation and dissolution.
Right.
Uh,
Wow. Okay. That's interesting. So how did you come across just to go, I mean, there's the Indian kind of spiritual connection, but how did you come across string theory? Are you from like a scientific background, or are you
I'm not.
just
Um,
curious about everything?
I'm just curious and about everything, and I had come across the idea of the world being an illusion originally from Indian philosophy, because I've studied yoga and yoga
Right.
philosophy. And so I've been fascinated with this idea that the world somehow is an illusion, even though we perceive everything as fixed,
Mm-hmm.
solid, and permanent. And then just in my exploration of various ideas, I was watching a YouTube video by a string theorist, Brian Greene, and I heard him describing this concept that was so similar to
Mm-hmm.
the concept from Indian philosophy. And I just found that really fascinating. I mean, I come
Mm-hmm.
across things that people with a scientific background can relate to, even though like I tap into things more in an intuitive way, um, almost like the process of making art maybe shifts my state of consciousness, so I become open to ideas where I don't necessarily understand where they're coming from, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm just compelled to explore them. And then later, people say, oh, that looks like this or that from
Mm-hmm.
science. And so I just, I don't come to it from that vantage point, but I think it connects, like
Mm-hmm.
the mystical idea and the scientific idea
Yeah.
um, is basically the same thing.
Yeah, so it's a kind of combination of um, kind of the empirical and the spiritual in a way, sort of science and kind of spiritual philosophy combined. Interesting. And So what's your process then? I mean, there's some works behind you on the wall. Are they I can't see them clearly from here, but they works on paper or are they
They're
on canvas?
acrylics on canvas.
Right. Okay. So they're quite small,
Well,
really.
actually, those
Okay.
are, well, in inches, 32 by 40 inches or
Okay.
30 by 40 inches.
Right. So they're a bit further away. They're not right
I
close
can go
next to you.
to get closer if you'd like.
Yeah. Okay. So they're not too small. I thought that they were right next to you, so they're a little bit larger than I thought. Okay. So what? And they're I mean, I want to ask you about color, your use of color in a minute, but so what's your process like? How do you approach the canvas? Like how are you, kind of laying down? Tell me how you kind of approach the canvas.
Well, I first do preliminary sketches with pencil, and then I
Mm-hmm.
do small watercolor or gouache or acrylic studies on paper.
Mm-hmm.
And then I expand them onto the canvas. And first I create this background where I'm trying to create the sense of ephemerality and movement
Mm-hmm.
and like a space that's active. And
Mm,
then and then I introduce the biomorphic dot forms into that.
mm-hmm.
And I use dot tools, not brushes to make the dots. It's kind of like a
Right.
stamp.
Right.
So I dip it in the paint and then like apply it. And I
Mm-hmm.
work horizontally to keep them fairly uniform.
Yeah.
And also just because it's just a lot more efficient and easier on my hands
Mm-hmm.
than painting every dot
Right.
um,
Okay.
brush. But
Because
I do
you
background with brushes.
Right, okay. Because do you want there to be some sort of uniformity and between all of the paintings? I mean, in terms of, your the stamp that you're using, is that why you're doing? I mean, aside from that, it's easier for you to do it, sounds like, but is that what you're trying to connect the different artworks, or is that not part of it?
Yes, and within one artwork, I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to suggest the idea that everything in the painting is comprised of the same recurring element, which unifies
Right.
everything, like this idea of the vibrating filament of energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Got you. Got you.
Everything, regardless of the size, ultimately is composed of the same units.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, yeah,
unit.
yeah.
But
And
they're not exactly
go on.
uniform. Like I don't want them to look like they were machine made. So they're all slightly different, every
Right,
dot.
right. And so there's a sort of, like when you talk about the biomorphic nature and the inspiration from these forms in nature, how does that how has that become part of your thinking and your work? Do you spend a lot of time in nature? Like, do
I
you?
do.
Yeah,
And specifically, I'm interested in recurring patterns in nature because that
right.
suggests to me that nature creates according to a blueprint rather than just
Mm,
randomly. And I'm especially interested in the pattern that occurs in neurons, tree branches, and river networks. And
mm,
um, that's another thing where I just felt spontaneously compelled to work with this painting, this idea, and then I found out gradually that it occurs everywhere, and so I use that as a recurring motif, but also as a structural element to build the biomorphic forms around. So in a lot of my paintings, you see this as a recurring theme, this kind of jagged fissure
yeah.
type of pattern. But to me, it relates to nature in the sense that that pattern recurs all over the place.
Yeah, yeah. And what I think, because your use of color is it's so vibrant, it's so like in your face, like that red is a really, really, I mean, you do get those colors in nature, of course you do, but there's a almost like a sort of juxtaposition between the colors that you're using and the kind of the forms of nature that makes it feel sort of slightly unnatural. Does that ring true for you? Is that part of your thinking, or how do you use color? Like how do you
So
choose your color?
I don't use it in a literal sense where I'm matching a color to something specific that occurs in
Mm,
nature, but
mm,
I'm interested in vibrancy and
mm,
creating color schemes where colors really pop
mm,
and and also I'm interested in vibrant color the way that it occurs in nature, like for example in certain flowers or
mm,
in the cosmos, interstellar dust.
mhm,
You see pictures through telescopes
mm,
of just the cosmos and the very vibrant colors that exist
mhm,
in the night sky that um, through these pictures we get.
mm,
So I think they do exist, but I know what you mean. It's typically, I mean, if I were doing a realistic depiction of something I saw literally, it wouldn't be so vibrant. But I just
mm,
really like to pump up the colors
mm,
to work with color almost like it's music, like composing
mm,
music, like it's an
mm,
abstract element, like notes in a
mm,
piece of music. It's
mhm,
about how this color affects another color and how
mhm,
they work together and the harmonies and the intensity of the combination and finding the
mm,
right balance. And so it's more, I guess, a process of just thinking abstractly about
mhm,
colors
mm.
together, different color schemes. And I spend a lot of time doing color experiments, looking for just the right color combination.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the two behind, or the three behind you are, I mean, they're one color largely, and is it white? That the dots are white, or are the dots red?
Actually,
And yeah, go
yeah,
on.
maybe it doesn't come through too well in the video, but
Yeah,
three colors that I use for the dots. Each painting has three dots.
right. Wow. Okay. See, that's the issue with computer screens, isn't it? It's why you just need to see things in the flesh. So there's three different color combinations within the dots and amongst the
Right.
dots.
I
Right.
could show you
Okay.
something real quick. I create these color scheme swatches.
Right.
I don't know if you could see that,
Yeah, yeah.
but like I work out the color schemes on paper first,
Okay. Got you. That makes
and
much more
and
sense.
so
Yeah.
I match them on the paintings. So
Yeah.
there's always a background color and then three different dot colors.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So, you spend a lot of time in, taking inspiration from nature. Do you take photographs? Like, what's your process of research? Do you have a kind of like a process of research in that sense, or is it more kind of studio based, intuitive kind of that kind of process? How do you kind of develop your sketches and
Well, often I'll start with a particular tree branch, say that I find inspiring, and then
yeah.
I'll start building a biomorphic form around the tree branch and then make it my own. But there's always some connection to something in nature, although
Hmm.
I'm looking for the pattern, the recurring pattern that connects
Hmm.
that to other things in nature, or just
Mm,
the essence of the form, but not a
hmm.
literal depiction of it. So
Hmm.
often I'm inspired by tree branches, and different things in nature that just have that pattern in it. Could be lightning bolts, or river networks too, um, are very inspiring. Or I'll look online at pictures of neurons, um, or different things that have that pattern, and then just find an element of one of those things and just
Hmm.
start there. And then I develop a drawing and then do a study and pair it with a color scheme and then make a painting out of it.
Right, cool, great. Is this like, I mean, I was looking at your website before, and you've had, I think, quite a long career as a professional artist. Is this always been your inspiration? I mean, when did the tea leaf moment happen?
Oh,
Has
that
it?
actually, well, I've been painting professionally since about 1995, but the inspiration to use the tea grounds happened around 2015.
Okay.
But um, the the inspiration to work with this recurring pattern of neurons, tree branches, river networks, lightning bolts, that happened in the early 2000s. So
Right.
I was working with that pattern back then to build form, but since I started working with the dots, I started building those forms out of dots.
Right. Got you. Okay. So was your work before then quite different or
Yeah, I would build the forms solidly. So I was working largely with that recurring pattern or other recurring patterns, building abstract forms with a recurring pattern as the starting point. Um, so, but then when the dots came in, everything I build, all the forms I build are always made out of dots
Mhm.
as building blocks.
Right. Got you. Got you. Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. Okay. Um, so in terms of like how your practice has developed over time, do you feel like you can see a real kind of shift over time of, you know, how you how you structure your paintings or how they, or is it quite sort of just a kind of a slight shift? I mean,
It's
how
a
would you
continuous,
characterize?
more of a continuous evolution with
Yeah,
distinct shifts at moments. Like this,
yeah,
there are distinct moments where I get a spark of inspiration, like with the
yeah,
tea grounds, or to use dots, or the moment when I became inspired to use this recurring pattern of this jagged fissure form.
yeah.
And other than that, I had a what feels like a breakthrough a few years ago when I changed the way that I use color and texture um,
Mm-hmm,
to create more of a ephemeral sense, a sense of movement to express the ideas that I'm interested in, that
mm-hmm,
everything's in flux and impermanent.
mm-hmm,
So I was doing that with the forms, but with the background, I started developing this technique so that the space feels like it's in flux too.
mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
yeah.
there's a shift that way too.
Yeah, okay. How is it exhibiting in New York? Do you exhibit your work a lot or like what are the opportunities that you find for exhibiting? Is it more
Yes,
international?
I just started getting interest in this new work, and a gallery offered to do a solo show in
Great.
2024, a Lower East Side
Amazing.
gallery. It's called Shelter
Amazing.
Gallery. So I'm
Okay.
really excited about that.
Oh, that is really cool. That's really good. That's 2024. Have you
Yes.
got to, are you going to be working on some new paintings for that? Presumably you will.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot already, but she wants to pick paintings from different groups. So I have like the general series, but then within that sub-series. So lots of different groupings. Like
Yeah.
for instance, these two, I call that the Fractalia series. That's another idea I'm interested in, fractals. The idea that the same image or pattern can occur on different scales.
Right.
So like this one, this was actually a recent new development where I extended the biomorphic form off the edge to suggest that everything that's happening within the painting is a smaller part of something larger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I definitely want to include some of those. And I feel like the work has its own path of evolution. So
Mm-hmm.
whatever I produce that they want to include, I mean, it'll be, I
Mm.
guess, a range of things that I've produced over the
Yeah.
last several years.
Yeah. Well, it's exciting to see. It would be exciting to see what you come up with for 2024 and how it develops. But it's been really amazing talking to you. Thank you so much, Andrea.
Likewise.
That's like I've really enjoyed learning more about your process and practice. I absolutely love your work.
Oh, so much.
So yeah,
I
thank you
love your
very
work
much.
too. I
Yeah.
really enjoy your writing. So
Oh, thank
look
you.
forward to reading a lot more of your writing. So
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. We're mutual fans then.
yes.
All right. Thank you very much for speaking.
Okay, thank you so much.